You know, I was privileged to be in Greg's company many a time. I covered a lot of press conferences for him, and Greg was a unique alderman. He will be missed. I mean, you didn't even have to send a reporter out with Greg. Just hand him the microphone. He was his own reporter. He did a great job in his ward, and he will be seriously missed.
Lauren, joining us now is Anna Crossan. She's president of the International Institute of St. Louis. Also we have here is Omar Maldonado of the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis, to my right. And also joining us, Adolphus Pruitt, the president of the St. Louis branch of the NAACP. We welcome all of you here today.
Thank you for having us.
Anna, I'd like to start with you. You know more than anybody in the St. Louis area about immigrants. Because how is our immigrant population doing here?
Well, you know, it's actually doing pretty well, but there aren't nearly as many of them as there are in most other like-sized metropolitan areas around the country. And so that's something I think that surprises people.
I was going to say it surprises me, because that's one thing I always hear, that I thought we were a hotbed for that, thinking of the Bosnian population and so forth. But then I heard the candidates talking in a debate, and somebody was making that point that we're suffering because we're not attracting enough immigrants.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've actually grown in terms of our immigrant population here in St. Louis quite a bit in the last decade, and yet still, if you were to look at the number of immigrants in St. Louis compared to like-sized metropolitan areas, you would find that there's 4 to 5 times more immigrants in those other metropolitan areas.
Is there a particular reason for that?
You know, we've not been able to figure it out, except to say that, like population loss in general here in St. Louis, the attraction factor from the other side, it hasn't attracted immigrants the way, in fact, it hasn't attracted other kinds of populations.
Maybe they don't like our pizza, or I'm just grabbing at straws.
You know, you get back
ravioli.
You get back to this whole thing of, you know, after the steamboat traffic stopped going up and down the Mississippi, our population has just kind of been going down, down, and down, and it's the same with immigrants too.
Well, Omar, what about the Hispanic population here in St. Louis? Could you give us a sort of description?
Well, the Hispanic population is consistently growing. And the thing that's unique actually about the Hispanic population in St. Louis, it's not what you would see in maybe some of the other larger metropolitan areas where you see one concrete hotbed of Hispanics in a particular neighborhood. By the time Hispanics come here to the area, they're pretty well accustomed. So you'll see them going in different areas. So you'll see people moving out to Wentzville, people moving out to St. Charles and the city. But we do have a very large group that is out, for example, out by Santa Cecilia's out in South City. We also have some in Overland, and Cherokee. Absolutely, the businesses in Cherokee contribute a lot as well.
But we have the largest Bosnian population in the United States, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We do. Probably the largest outside of Bosnia.
Right,
in
that's
fact.
what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but those were refugees. One of the things that we have to remember about immigrants in general are that is the general immigrant population that comes and they apply through family reunification or labor certification, etc. And then there is a subset who are refugees who are forced to flee because of persecution. And they actually need to be sponsored by an organization somewhere in the United States to be resettled. And we have resettled a lot of them. We've sponsored a lot of them here in St. Louis because we haven't had so many other immigrants.
Well, of course, it was a big issue in the presidential election and will continue to be. And it's interesting because, we're a nation of immigrants. On my mother's side, I'm 5th generation German. So, and most of us are, right? If you go back far enough, everybody came from somewhere.
And look at the great benefits that having those immigrants come into South City. You had an area that was dying, that was having hardships with the businesses, and you had this group of immigrants that came in, rebuilt businesses, started moving in, just started driving the economic factor, and was able to build that back up. And it's just proof what immigrants can do.
Yes.
Adolphus Pruitt, let me ask you, as the president of the NAACP, there's no way in the world that you can turn St. Louis into a great city and deal with all the problems we have when the largest population of the city is facing so many struggles of their own.
Absolutely right. In most cases, North St. Louis, and lately now South, since we're migrating over to South St. Louis, those segments of the population are suffering from every adverse social outcome you can think about. And you're right, it's impossible to have a great city while addressing their shortcomings.
So where do you think we start on that? People always point to schools as maybe where the problem begins. Is that fair?
Schools is a starting point, but there's a myriad of things that come into play that should have happened but they have not. If you look at access to employment, equal opportunity as it relates to employment opportunities, construction jobs, construction contracting opportunities, all of those things play a part in providing true back office, or what we call back office employment opportunities for inner city people, and it just hasn't happened.
And before kids go to school, they leave home. So the problem is at home, in broken homes, unemployed homes, people where the fathers are not there. There's nobody, you know, before the child goes to school, they got to leave home. So the problem starts at home. If we don't have the economics and we don't have a school system, then we have high crime.
Yeah, I mean, it all plays into again socioeconomics as we talk about, and especially in the homes. But again, if I was able to get most of the people to work in those homes, then I think we see a lot of our problems go away.
Omar, what's the financial condition of Hispanics in St. Louis generally, overall? Do they have good jobs? Are they making a good living?
You know, it's all over the place. I mean, truly, I mean, we can't really say that it's really great or it's really poor, because it's just like many of the other cultures that you see. It's just, it varies. I mean, we have some issue with people and jobs and businesses, but we have some businesses. I mean, if you take a look at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here in St. Louis, they have some phenomenal businesses that are achieving great things, and they're bringing that wealth into St. Louis, and they're spreading that wealth throughout the community.
Lauren, you hit on it. You were talking about the families, and Adolphus, would you say that's part of the problem in the African American community? Because if you grow up in poverty, if you grow up in a family that's challenged, the odds are, not always, the odds are you're going to be too.
Yeah, but again, it comes to equal opportunity, opening doors, access to capital. There's just a myriad of disparities that impact our ability to thrive in some other areas.
Well, so speaking of jobs, excuse me,
Go ahead.
Butt in, Lauren.
I got questions.
Tell me if I'm talking too much, all right? I just want to follow up on the jobs thing, because Anna, you just came back from Washington, D.C., and you talked about jobs there.
Yeah, we did. Actually, I was in Washington, D.C. with a business delegation from St. Louis that included the St. Louis Business Development Corporation head Rodney Krim and Denny Coleman from the St. Louis County Economic Development Council, and Joe Reagan, the head of the new St. Louis Regional Chamber, I guess is the name now,
Right.
and several other individuals. And we actually were meeting with our elected representatives, both the Missouri and Illinois delegation, to talk about how important certain aspects of immigration reform were to this region, because we haven't had a lot of refugees and immigrants here before. It's not necessarily on the radar screen of people how they can in fact contribute to building the economy. For instance, immigrants across the spectrum, immigrants, whether you're talking highly skilled or people who are just very, very hardworking, are 60% more likely to start a business than native-born Americans of any other group are. So when you look at immigrant impact and what I just said earlier about us being 4 to 5 times behind other metropolitan areas in terms of the number of immigrants that are here, that then relates to small business startups. And if we as a region want to be able to create more jobs, then we have to look at having more immigrants to be able to do it. Now, immigrants, they don't even just start those businesses and employ people, but they shop at the supermarket, they buy gas at the gas station, they rent or buy a house from a realtor, etc. And so they are spreading what they're earning around the community then and creating other jobs while you're at it. So there's a whole cycle that occurs in terms of job creation because you have more people. And in the end, the message of these economic development people in Washington was, we need people. As a region, we are dying because more people are leaving here than are coming here. And if we don't have those people, then we're not going to build up our tax base. Our schools are always going to be underfunded. We're not going to have the chance to be able to move forward for all of our people the way we need to.
I'm curious, you met with Claire McCaskill and Roy Blunt and members of the congressional delegation.
Right.
So I'm wondering, Omar, you some feedback on, is everybody on board with wanting more immigrants and trying to promote it? Is that what you find from our public officials?
I think there's always good intent.
Why are you laughing?
Well, because it's difficult. I mean, there's so many things that go into it, and I think there's always good intent. I think the difference is what are we going to do to walk the walk? a lot of times we take a look at some of the things that we'd like to see happen, but it's really about strategically planning what needs to happen so we can make sure that we're successful in doing it. And part of the things that Anna was talking about goes directly with Adolphus, what Adolphus is saying, which is that opportunity to be able to have those businesses grow, that equal opportunity that's out there, and level the playing field. I don't know, I've talked with plenty of business people on multiple different sides, and I don't see people that are looking for a handout. I don't see any of them. What I see are people that are looking for a level playing field.
Yeah, but I hate to be the spoiler, but when we talk about immigrants, we need to make sure that we understand that there's even a disparity as relates to treatment and opportunities for immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa. Right. So when we talk about immigrants, let's make sure we understand that's a unique pie.
Right.
And even within that pie, there are some slices that don't get the same treatment as others.
Right. I was going to ask, is St. Louis considered a welcoming place? Is this someplace people want to go? Because you got Arizona out there, they're putting up borders. They got people running in there, and they don't see the value of immigrants here. And then I look on the same other hand, if you look in the black population here in the city of St. Louis, it's probably a 14 to 20% unemployment rate. Do we need people here to take jobs? Are those people qualified for the same jobs any immigrant population would be?
We need more people here that will eventually create more jobs. Actually,
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether they are native born or immigrants,
Right.
etc. If they live in apartments, if they buy at the grocery store, if they, do all of these things, what they're doing is they're creating jobs in the economy for everyone. So who actually gets a job where? How that flows out into the economy benefits everybody. At that point, that's a really important fact to understand, is this secondary fallout from anybody. If it's me and my job, I still pay taxes. I go to the grocery store. I do all those things that benefit other people in the community. And that's with everybody that's working. There's that fallout effect of it that benefits everyone. Our problem is we need a better tax base. We need more people here. We need all of those things.
Okay, well, you talk about keeping people here. You talk about attracting people here, but then we have to think about keeping people here. And Adolphus, I don't know what you think about this, but I was thinking about quote unquote white flight back in the 60s when white people moved out of the city into the North County and then I guess later West County. Is there an issue now with black flight? When I'm talking like middle-class black people that are maybe giving up on the city because they want a better life for their kids too.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's been going on actually since integration. So that flight.
Isn't it true that actually the rate of black flight from the city is higher than white right now? That's the number I think.
Yeah, in most cases, but they live in the most destitute part of the city.
It's for a different reason.
So they're escaping the same poverty.
Well, actually, I'm talking about middle class black flight. Anyway.
But they leave in the same part of the city. They're not leaving South St. Louis, they're not leaving the Central West End.
Right.
They're leaving North St. Louis
Right.
and the worst parts of it. So.
I had a buddy of mine, we were talking the other day, and he said his father told him when he was a kid, when white folks leave, they take their services with them. And you go up in North St. Louis, you can drop pennies everywhere you want to, and you can't find a big box store. There's one grocery store in town. There are no services, and then you have to deal with the high crime rate. Let me ask you this, Adolphus. Is St. Louis being held back by race relations and the lack of talking about it like Greg Friedman used to do?
Absolutely. I mean, let's be realistic about it. We're probably one of the most segregated communities I can think of, major urban areas.
In 2013, though, I mean, you go to Atlanta, you go to other places, it seems like people have found the problem, have put some salve on it, they've healed it, and they moved on. It seems like we're still mired down in this, keeping some people down and not welcoming and not.
Well, let's be realistic. If you don't live next door to each other, you don't have religious service together, you don't attend school together, and you don't shop at the same places, how will you ever impact integration? How will it happen? People tend to live in certain areas, certain neighborhoods, and when they get there, that becomes their whole world to some degree, and that's what happens.
Yeah, and to his point, St. Louis I found to be unique. I originally came from the Virginia, D.C. area, and when I moved here at a very young age, and one of the things that I noticed is that segregation for some, and chime in on this, but it seems to be almost like a self-segregation is what tends to happen in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area.
Well, there's less to blend the edges. If you talk about Washington, D.C., Atlanta, these other groups, they are actually more than black and white. They
Absolutely.
actually have Hispanic and Asian and in higher numbers, and so there is more of a mix. One of the things that's happened here in Missouri and in St. Louis is so many people have been born, grown up, and lived just here in St. Louis, and they haven't been somewhere else. And so what happens is all those kind of habits that they built up forever and a day have continued because there was no way to break the cycle.
Well, yeah, but I disagree. We create laws to, they say to save neighborhoods like the nuisance law.
Right.
And now neighborhoods are using the nuisance law to keep certain people out their neighborhood. Somebody black moving to a block that's predominantly white. Right. They don't like them. They can pick up the phone, they call the police, they use the nuisance law. Next thing you know, the city is slapping some sort of fine on them and telling them they're gonna lock up the house and you can't stay in there. I mean,
And one of the things that is really great about some of the organizations that we're seeing come up in St. Louis, for example, Anna's organization is being able to embrace the different cultures. Because truly, when we're looking at making St. Louis a tier 1 city, there has to be a lot more awareness of the different cultures that are out there and the different races. And until we start doing that, whether it be with some of the events that we hold downtown, bringing in other organizations into St. Louis, those are the things that'll help us integrate these different types of thinking, different cultures, different races, to help break down some of those barriers.
While I think we're known because of the Bosnian refugees, because there were just so many of them, the truth of the matter is when you look at the refugee population in the last decade, it has included Asians and Africans and Hispanics and all of the many, people of the world.
Yeah,
and so it's much
in,
more diverse.
Yeah, but the Bosnians came in and created a Bosnian neighborhood.
Let me
When there's 70,000 of them, it's going to happen.
Just one final thing. Omar, you said something about St. Louis being a tier 1 city. So just very briefly, all of you, do we have reason to feel optimistic about solving all the things we've been discussing right now? Are we going to become that tier 1 city?
Yes, absolutely.
I believe in time.
If we don't figure out how to attract population at this point, they're figuring by, I think it's 2015 or something, we will drop out of the top 20 metro areas. And when that happens, national sales advertising doesn't come in here, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd better figure out an answer.
Yeah, we don't have a choice.
We don't have a choice.
Well, you three have added a lot to this, and we appreciate your input very much. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
When we were speaking about immigrants, about Bosnians, and we made the point that we do have the largest Bosnian population in the United States here, why don't we join Debbie Monterey right now to find out more about the Bosnian culture right here in St. Louis.
Thank you, Steve. We're talking about the Bosnian community in the St. Louis area, which has changed a lot over the last 20 years. Some new issues facing the Bosnian community, some certainly remain the same. Shukriya Djijovic joins me right now to talk more about the issues facing the Bosnian community. And Mr. Djijovic is also the founder and publisher of Sabah, which is a national paper that is right here in St. Louis in the Bosnian language. You have been here from New York City for the last decade or so, right?
7 years I'm here.
Now, there has been a lot of changes in the Bosnian community, mostly still in South City, but a lot in South County. What would you say at this particular time is one of the biggest issues facing the Bosnian community in the St. Louis area?
I would say that the biggest issue is education of Bosnian youth, that our new kids are coming and getting the leading positions in this city. So I think that Bosnia community in St. Louis and nationwide, I mean in the United States, is growing very fast, and it became a stable issue in environment.
I remember a few years ago speaking with the International Institute, and they said at the time when so many Bosnians were coming, it seemed like the biggest challenge they would face because of the numbers. But looking back on it, there were so many blessings to the Bosnian community coming because they were educated, they were people who would start a business and run things, and really that, in many ways, has rejuvenated South City and South County. So being that we've gone from a community of political refugees in many cases to now being business owners and in some ways community leaders. How does that sort of change the conversation that the Bosnian community has with the city?
Such a thing is very important to say that is matter of two generations. One generation is my generation who came over here educated with broken English or non-English at all, and starting and trying to build something, and the new generation who grew up over here, who came as a kid of 6, 7, and 8. Today those kids are 27 and 28. So we have hope on them. But for us it's not easy, and thanks to St. Louis, thanks to this town, and you mentioned it, International Institute, who gave to Bosnian community very good opportunity for first steps, employing them, giving them opportunity for ESL, learning English, and finding jobs, which wasn't a case in my case because when I came in 1995, I came as a refugee in New York without International Institute, so I was on my own.
There are, as we said, a lot of Bosnian businesses, restaurants, people who have now pursued very professional careers, and yet it doesn't seem that there has necessarily been that move of Bosnians in city government or politics. Do you see that as something important?
Unfortunately, till today we have no representative, our Bosnian representative, not even in City Hall or in another political institution. But I think that time would come with the new generation. And I think in the future that we should have at least the alderman or alderwoman from our area that would be a Bosnian, or maybe in the future mayor would be a Bosnian, who knows? This is a country of opportunity, and also, as we know, the previous mayor wasn't originally American, so it's possible.
How important is it to your generation that the younger generation, not just the ones who were young when they came here, but the ones who are born here and really know nothing of Bosnia other than maybe what their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles tell them, how important is that for you to sort of keep that knowledge alive, that culture, while kids are growing up very American?
That's one of the reasons why my newspaper exists, and I wish would exist in the future, to introduce to newborn Americans with a Bosnian background, to introduce to them Bosnian heritage, Bosnian culture and tradition. So I hope that they would travel like this young generation is traveling to Bosnia at least once in 5 years.
Well, as I held up these papers before we let you go, we have one issue with Mayor Slay, and we have one issue with Lewis Reed. So let's talk a little bit about the Slay administration. How pleased have you been with that, and what would you expect possibly to see with another Slay administration? Or has Lewis Reed reached out to the Bosnian community, and does he have anything different to offer than this administration has?
Our experience showed to us that really Mayor Slay responded very well to Bosnian community in a manner that he always shows up on all Bosnian events. And he is very well known in our community. We see him pretty often in our restaurants, in our stores, and with our people. So that's an experience that we had with him. I don't know who will win. I wish winning to both of them, but which is not possible. But also what we have from Lewis Reed already, we have as a chairman of board of alderman, we see that alderman who is now Carol Howard, she does good work, and Lewis Reed knows about that. And we as a Bosnian community, we are thankful to them on this. But today, before election, we still have promises of Lewis Reed that he will bring a lot of change. At least he promised that if he becomes a mayor, we would have our Bosnian representatives in City Hall, which would be huge things for us.
Shukriyo Djijovic, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me here.
Publisher and founder of Sabah newspaper, based right here in St. Louis, and a nationwide Bosnian newspaper. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Debbie, and I'm here along with Lauren Watt, and we're going to pick up where we left off. Our guests are Omar Maldonado from the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis, to my right. Also here, Anna Crossland from the International Institute, and Adolphus Pruitt from the NAACP in St. Louis.
One of the things I picked up from the interview there that the gentleman was talking about was the participation of Bosnians in the city government, in the legislature. How are immigrants dealing with that particular problem?
Well, surprisingly, given how many Bosnians there are here in St. Louis, and we estimate the total population, including American-born children, at about 70,000, there are virtually no elected representatives who are of Bosnian heritage. And we don't quite understand whether that's because they have wanted to run but haven't really understood the system and therefore have not gotten into it, or whether they have tried and been shut out or whatnot. But you would think with that many people that you'd see some Bosnian elected representatives, and we haven't.
I just personally don't detect any anti-Bosnian bias, just with
Right.
people I know. I mean, I don't pick up on that at all.
Oh, well, it's a little bit under, but I can tell you that in the early 2000s, for instance, big stories in the Riverfront Times, etc. I was in the news practically every week because the South Side neighborhoods, in fact, were up in an uproar. Do you remember the whole thing about the smokehouses? Yeah, the smokehouses and how they were barbecuing Muffy in the backyard or something. I mean, it was terrible. And so, yeah, it's quieted down now, but the reality is even the Bosnians had a terrific problem in terms of being able to be accepted in the community when they first arrived.
I guess that's typical. Maybe you can, I mentioned being a fifth-generation German. I remember my grandmother, who was born in 1891, telling me how rough it was on the Germans at one time, how they were really discriminated on.
Well, and you know what was so interesting is that many of these people who were so anti-Bosnian in the smokehouses were in fact of German heritage. And I'd say to them, don't you remember your parents, your grandparents used to smoke beets? Oh, no, not like this, they'd say. Short memories, when they chose to think of it that way.
Is there a difference between certain cultural groups? Some cultural groups come over here and do not try to assimilate. Some cultural groups come over and try to assimilate, and they find a marginal resistance at that. Is that what causes that, the assimilation in here?
No, I think that which is to some degree is a good thing. I think they find a certain amount of comfort level and support with living among each other, so they cling together, regardless of what group of people it is. That happens, and they depend on each other to deal with the issues that are out here.
Is that a little self-defeating?
To some degree, it is.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's a first-generation issue, and it's driven by language and culture.
Right.
My mom is Japanese. We came to the United States when I was 2 years old, and I grew up bilingual, and so I was able to assimilate in the culture pretty easily because I didn't have any barriers. My mom still would get together with her Japanese friends and eat food, and still does up until recently, because there's a comfort level that's associated with it. Even though she became a successful restaurateur and functioned very well out in the open environment, for comfort she'd go back to that group, to be able to kind of talk about the old country and use the language and stuff. I don't think that's wrong, as long as you balance it then by the fact that you also need to be able to get out and function in society.
Well, and sometimes there's unreasonable expectations, though, too, from people that are coming in, from different countries or different languages. My mother, my family's from Puerto Rico, and we have citizenship from the moment I'm born. And my mom was born and raised in Puerto Rico, has been here for years, and 30-something years that she's been here within the States. And to this day, she still has a pretty good accent on her. And you can tell that she was not born and raised, in Missouri, that she was born and raised somewhere else, that she's Hispanic. And we can't expect for people to just erase that.
Yeah.
That's just not going to happen. So
if you look at the studies, the first generation, they assimilate partially, but they still cling to some of the traditions. The second generation then almost rejects those traditions many times. Third generation then comes back and says, what was Grandma's heritage? I don't understand anything about this. Can I learn about it and celebrate it a little bit because it's parts of my roots? And so it's a very typical assimilation process.
Omar, let me ask you this question. I saw in some of the literature we were reading a phrase called police biasing.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that in the Hispanic population.
Well, it's different than racial profiling. Racial profiling is something where they're looking at a particular look of someone, and they're saying that this is, this type of person you have to figure is going to do this or that. But the biasing is different. The biasing tends to be more of a, you can help me out with this, Anna.
It's focused around legality more than it is around expectation or fear that that person might be doing something, casing a neighborhood in order to burglarize it or something like that. But instead, when they see a Hispanic face, too quickly they make an assumption at that point that that person may be here illegally.
So, for example, when a police officer racial profiles, let's say, there was a store that was held up, and they can say, yes, there was a Hispanic male that did that. So when they're canvassing the area, they're looking for an Hispanic male. They have that racial profile. In those instances, that's what they need to do to be able to find the suspect.
Yeah, it's a wide brush, though.
Right, but the bias is a little bit more broad. It's saying, well, Hispanics in general, they're always doing this.
Isn't that what Mayor Bloomberg is doing in New York? And it seems to be working from what I'm reading. I'm not saying that's good or bad, right? Isn't he criticized for doing that?
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, is we always got to remember is that, my rights stop where your rights begin.
That's right, absolutely.
So,
one final question for y'all. You were talking about, you were making a point about Bosnians not holding any elective office and being represented in that way. And I don't know about your community. Tell me that. And do immigrants vote? And do we know if they do or not?
I can tell you that my mom has voted in every national election since she got here, since she got her citizenship in 1957, and she's proud of it. See, especially with refugees, they didn't have a chance. They fled political oppression. So to them, the value of voting, that's a freedom. That's one of those incredibly important freedoms that they have.
What's happening in Kenya
and so
today.
you see really high, absolutely, in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is not democratic. I mean, they value that right to vote because to them, it personifies everything that they didn't have before.
They are bleeding and dying. They had a picture of a guy on CNN the other day. His ear was chopped off. He had been hacked and whacked with a machete. And they just attacked him, saying he was trying to stop people from voting or helping the people to vote. And we are over here at 15%, where all you got to do is get in your car, go around the corner, and take 10 minutes to vote, because there's only two things to vote for: the mayor and your alderman, if that is in fact the case. And people are dying across the country and across the world, and not taking advantage. We take it for granted.
Yeah. Any final words?
We have a great democratic system set up here, and I encourage everybody, to go out there and vote for who they feel is going to be their best candidate.
Yeah. And I would say,
go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say is, I think what we have to remember in the middle of all this about immigrants is immigrants love this country. They love the values we stand for at this point. Their family values, this freedom, the ability to be able to vote, etc. They're actually like us. Their language and culture may be a little different, but if you dig a little differently, you find they're like us.
Well, I don't know if the Bosnians are voting at all. All I do know is that the ward they're in, they have a significant enough population to determine who's going to be alderman. Absolutely. And either they're elected one that's there, or they decided to sit it out. And only the numbers will tell that.
Well, I think I can safely say that everyone at this table voted today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
All right. Bet Debbie Monterey voted too. Let's check in with her right now.
Thanks, Steve. There's a lot going on in the St. Louis community when it comes to our Latino community, and a lot in our immigration community as well, and how that can play a role in helping St. Louis to grow and bring jobs. Joining me right now is Jorge Rio Pedre with Casa de Salud. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
For people who maybe are not familiar with Casa de Salud, which is right there on Choteau and Compton, what does Casa de Salud do?
In brief, Casa de Salud is a clinic that offers low-cost, high-quality access to mental and physical health, particularly for the Latino community, although we are open to anyone who has no insurance.
Now, as the healthcare reform takes hold, how does that change in any way the services that Casa de Salud offers?
So the services per se are not going to change. What we perceive as the main shift, if you will, is the Affordable Care Act does not cover anyone who is undocumented. And even if we have immigration reform come out of Washington, I will guarantee you that immigration reform will not retroactively add the undocumented. to the Affordable Care Act, even if they should have now legal status to work. And so you're going to have 11 to 12 million people who will not have, generally speaking, not have the money to buy private insurance, but will also not be covered under the Affordable Care Act, and so will have a very, very difficult time finding services. And so with that population, CASA is going to continue to play a major role. Also, if the Missouri legislature should decide not to expand Medicaid, which is the principal, one of the principal tools that the Affordable Care Act had to cover a variety of people, Hispanic or otherwise. If that expansion does not take place, then you are looking at maybe 250,000 Missourians who will remain uncovered despite of the Affordable Care Act. And CASA, I'm sure, will bear at least some of the brunt of those people.
Let's talk a little bit about the Latino community in St. Louis, because it is, as far as a city the size of St. Louis goes, it's a fairly small population compared to, say, a Chicago or a Kansas City. And some people have really pointed to that fact as being a hindrance to bringing new jobs and bringing new ideas.
I totally agree. I think that the secret sauce of the United States of America has always been the new blood, the new ideas, the new innovation that is spurred by immigrants coming into an area. And if you are an area like St. Louis that is very low number and low growth of immigrants, Hispanic or otherwise, immigrants across the spectrum, that's not just me talking. Statistics show us that retards growth. And so Chicago, 4.5 hours ahead of us, one of the primary reasons that I would argue that Chicago has a much more robust economy is because of Chicago's success in attracting immigrants of all different stripes. St. Louis really needs to make a larger effort to attract immigrants, because immigrants, as I say, inject new vitality in an area, and they are not job takers, they are job creators.
When we talk about a small-ish population of Latinos in this area, and we have some heated dialogue on a national level about immigration and sealing the border, do you think that those things kind of play into having to overcome, in some ways in the St. Louis area, some negative stereotypes because people may not be very familiar with the Latino community?
I think so. I think that if any issue that is consistently painted in a negative light is going to, by default, influence people's opinions of a particular subject. Immigration, in this case, I think is an excellent example. I have to say that I'm very pleased that the Missouri legislature, and I give a lot of credit to Ron Richard, the majority floor leader, and Senator John Lamping, to the Republican leaders in the Missouri Senate, who have really taken a role in stopping the legislation and the bills that were coming out of that body that continued, in my opinion, to paint Missouri as a state that was unwelcoming to immigrants. And the more we heard of that, the more I think that people in general across the state had a negative image of the immigrant population.
What would you say as we head into another election cycle here, at least in the city of St. Louis, would be some of the biggest issues facing either Casa de Salud or the Latino community on a larger level? Well,
I mean, access to health care is going to be a continued issue for all the reasons I already stated. If you do not have access to health care, you're not going to be able to do well as a population. And of course, that's going to affect the population in general, because any community that has chronically sick among them is going to have problems. And of course, an ongoing situation is education. We have to see what we can do, not only for the Latino community, obviously, but to improve the educational attainment and accessibility for our kids, or otherwise St. Louis and the entire region will be at a deficit for the foreseeable future.
We've had some incidents around the St. Louis area. I know particularly there was a very contentious story from the Cherokee Street area where a well-respected business leader was being deported because she was not of legal status, and the community kind of rallied behind her. And there was the Valley Park issue where we had, I guess the ability to kick people out of housing and things like that, which I think is just one of the things you're talking about, some negative things. Do you feel like there's that impetus to sort of turn things around now and to make this a friendlier community for Latinos, to bring that growth and more immigrants, as we were talking about earlier?
You know, absolutely, and I think you're seeing it particularly in this new Immigration and Innovation Task Force that has been launched cooperatively by St. Louis County and the City of St. Louis, with its stated goal of making St. Louis the fastest immigrant population growing city in the country by 2020. This is an effort that is governmental, that is private business, that are community leaders coming together, recognizing the need for immigration to make St. Louis a vital place, and coming together to really lay down the groundwork of how, over the next close to 10 years, St. Louis is going to turn the corner and bring in more immigrants to make us a truly diverse metropolitan, economically motivated region. And it gives me a lot of hope. I've been in St. Louis for over 20 years, and this is the first major push, concerted, organized push that I've seen to really make our region more immigrant friendly, and that gives me tremendous hope.
Jorge, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Jorge Rio Pedre is with Casa de Salud. Back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm here along with Lauren Watt. It's primary election night. I know we're all kind of waiting for the numbers to come in,
Yes,
which
sir.
they could at any time. And we're going to spend a couple more minutes with our guests, Anna Crossland from the International Institute, Adolphus Pruitt from the St. Louis NAACP, and Omar Maldonado from the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis. And Omar, I know that interview was of interest to you.
Yeah, it is. You know, we've been talking about how to create just a better environment for immigrants and create new businesses and create that growth. And you know, the Casa de Salud has done a phenomenal job at doing that. They are an organization that realized right away, and actually the chair of that organization, Bob Fox, has done a fantastic job of spearheading that. They realized the impact that the immigrant community has here in this community, and by doing so, they created a need, or they addressed a need. They addressed a need, and that was one of healthcare. You know, you have people that are wanting to work. You have people that are wanting to create jobs. But how can they do all these great things when they can't take care of their basic needs, such as health? And they were able to create an organization that was, you know, people are able to come in, take care of health needs, be proactive about it, and the amount of people that have gone there from when they first opened to now has grown exponentially.
Yeah. And it is almost entirely volunteer driven, which is one of the really fantastic things about it. And it receives a lot of help from St. Louis University in terms of the coordination and the facility and things like that. But it's almost entirely a volunteer driven operation. And as Omar says, you know, Bob Fox, the chair of the board, has really been instrumental in this whole immigration and innovation initiative that spearheaded, among other things, the recent trip to Washington, D.C. And it does include, you know, business people, and it includes government people, but it also includes people from affected organizations in the community. I'm a member of the task force, but Jim Buford is also a member of the task force from the Urban League. And so we've really tried to draw together people from the many aspects of the community to sit down and talk about these issues in a, you know, sort of person-to-person way to come up with solutions that are mutually satisfying to all of the parties that are involved.
Yeah, but the problem is, and you know, NAACP, we represent everybody who is impacted by any sort of bias and disparity in immigrants as well as anybody else is. Problem is nobody's raised the discussion to a level in which we really need to address one of the undercurrents. The undercurrent is that we have people, African Americans, who have been in the city generation after generation after generation, and each and every time there's a movement afoot to create this fairness, to create this economic balance, to create this economic vitality, and to create all these opportunities. First it was the Vietnamese, then at some point in time it was, I forgot who else, then the Bosnians and this and that. When do we have a discussion about the fact that if we're gonna start targeting these resources, we're gonna make this giant effort to bring in this large, another segment of population, right, and target all these resources and these opportunities toward them, then what about the opportunities for the folks who've been here the whole time?
Well, you know, we've lost our majority-minority status. I think is what's happened.
Well, not in the city of St. Louis. Not in the city of St. Louis.
No, but what is happening is because of the changing environment nationally, there is a push at a different kind of a balance. But what I was saying earlier really, I believe is true, which is that we don't leave anyone behind when we create more economic vitality for the region. And so the fact that you have more immigrants here, for instance, it means more businesses, it means more jobs for everyone, including
But the
the
businesses they
African-Americans
create
of the
are for the
community.
immigrants that they associate with.
But they
The
buy.
jobs.
But they buy from the grocery store and they buy at the gas station and everything else.
Yeah,
and it is not necessarily so that they create only for themselves. If you look at technology, if you look at the different kinds of businesses they create jobs that, in fact, even the Bosnians. I can think of a case of a Bosnian detailing shop in South St. Louis that has 15 employees. 5 of them are Bosnians and 10 of them are native-born Americans. It's a mix many times. It is not exclusively one group or another.
Well, it is when you come to our neighborhood. I don't know about everywhere else, but if you go into the North St. Louis community where the black folks live, if the immigrants have a business there, the immigrants are also the employees of those businesses. And that's what we see, and that's what impacts them. But again, you know, we're talking about refugees. Well, I can tell you where the largest number of refugees are right now in the city of St. Louis.
Well,
they're in North St. Louis.
Do the different immigrant groups need to work more together?
I think there's always opportunity for people to start working together, not just immigrant, because you know one of the things that we discussed earlier is that many of these things that come about don't just affect an immigrant population. They affect minority population. They affect all types of people, and the reality is that when we start looking with blinders on just at what's going on in front of our face, we're doing the same thing that we complain about everybody else doing, and that's leaving them out to the side. So I always think that there's opportunity for us to start working together. Now, what I am really happy to see is some of these different organizations that are stepping up to the plate, such as the Hispanic Leaders Group, such as the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Urban League, Casa de Salud. I mean, they talk about Casa de Salud earlier about just the immigrants, but that's not, they don't say just immigrants. I mean, it's really open to other people. So being able to open that conversation and say everyone's invited to the table, that's what we're seeing this new movement do, and say, come sit down, let's see, because we have some of the same issues, let's work on it together.
And I think that's what Anna made a good point about the companies and corporations. Like somebody told me the other day, what is the corporation doing for the community?
Absolutely.
More handshake agreements, more help like that. Businesses like Rankin Technical, what are they doing? They go out in the community, they help build houses, they help teach people how to build houses. So we need to build rather than tear down.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we want to thank you all again for contributing so much to this. We appreciate it. And
Lively.
have a great election.
Thank
Are
you.
you going to watch party or anything? Or what are you planning?
No, but I'm eager to hear the numbers. I keep waiting for the numbers.
I think we've got some coming in a while, so hang on there.
Okay.